Hi there, in this video I'm going to make a really simple particle system exactly like this. So basically I'm going to create a really simple scene. I'm just going to make a cube, call this ground. Make this scale of 20 by 1 by 20, and just from that as well add another capsule. This will be our player that we're eventually going to replace with the particle system when we make it. And lastly, just make a material as well, because we want to make this red material so that we can have something that looks not just plain white when we make this. And just a quick test to make sure that everything's good. So the next step is we just want to make the particle system. So we just go down to Game Object, choose Effects, and then Particle System. We'll create this particle system, and I'm just going to call mine Boom. Now we need to make a few changes to this particle system. The first step would be make the lifetime of the particles 1 and the start speed is 1. The next step is to make the emission, rather than a rate over time of 10, make that 0 and add a burst of the default 30 particles. So we get 30 particles instantly. And the shape, rather than make a cone, let's turn that into, let's go with a sphere. And we'll leave the radius and thickness. Just move it up a little bit so we can see it a bit better. The next thing is that we want to change this shape so they're not particles, but we're going to make them meshes. So we change this render mode here from billboard down to mesh, and the default it creates as a cube, so we can just leave it at that. Change that particle material as well to the default red that we made for our player. And then if we have a little look at some of the other things that we can change in here, we want to set this render alignment so that rather than it looks at you, we'll make it world, and then we'll need to change the rotation of that as it comes in. And pretty much everything else here we can leave the same. So we want the particles to fall, so I'm just going to add this gravity modifier, just try 0.5 for now, and I want to see it happen more frequently, so I'm just going to change the duration to 2. The next step would be to try and change the rotations a little bit. So I'm going to look at the start rotation. I'm going to make this a 3D start rotation so that we get different ones, and use the little drop down here to change the random between two constants. That allows us to choose random values when the particle is instantiated. I'm going to just type in minus 180 for the lower limit and 180 for the upper limit for each of those X, Y, and Z rotations so that they appear random each time. Next, I'm just going to make their lifetime a little bit longer with that start lifetime up to 2. And then I'm going to add some collisions into here. So if you just change this type to world and leave this as 3D world, you'll see that they actually bounce off the world. I'm going to change this damp value up a little bit so we lose some of the energy as they bounce. So I'm going to change that to 0.8, so you'll see they kind of like bounce just a touch, and maybe make this bounciness down a little bit too, so I'll randomly pick 0.8 for that too. And these other values you can change, but it doesn't look too bad. I think you need to move a little bit faster so that looks a bit more dynamic. I'll maybe also change the start size there to 0.5 because they're a bit big. And I want them to come out at different speeds, so I'm going to use the little drop down next to the start speed and choose random between two constants. I'm just going to choose between 1 and 5 so that they come out at different speeds and it looks a little bit more random. So let's just make that 3 and slightly better. So that looks pretty good. Just maybe make the gravity look a bit floaty, so I'll make the gravity go up a little bit. So just that gravity modifier again, move that up to 1 so that they drop a little bit faster. That looks a little bit more realistic. So we're going to just turn this into a prefab now. So I'll just take the particle system, put it down into the assets, and then we're going to write a script on the player so we can instantiate that particle system, simulating that it's been exploded. So I'm just making a new script and we'll call this explode, and we'll just open this up in Visual Studio. So what we need to do is create a handle to that prefab, so we'll just make a public game object and we'll call this explosion prefab, and we'll be able to assign that in the inspector so that we can instantiate it. Now down inside the update, we're just going to do a quick if statement, and we're just going to use if input dot, and we use get key down, and we'll choose key code dot space. I think just to when we hit the space bar, we'll be able to instantiate the object. Next, we'll actually run the instantiate, and we'll instantiate the explosion prefab that we need to still assign, and we'll pass in its transform.position and transform.rotation of this game object, the player game object that this is attached to. Now we need to make sure, we'll have a quick test, but we need to make sure we don't forget to assign that prefab onto that new slot in the script. So we've got the explosion prefab down here, and we drag the boom explosion that we made, the prefab, onto the explosion prefab slot, and that way we can delete that from the scene because we're going to instantiate it. So doing a quick test, when I hit the space bar, you'll see that the particle systems gets made. The last important thing though is just make sure we destroy that player, because we left it where it is. So just add in a line destroy game object at the end of that, so that when we actually hit the space bar, the player disappears and the particle system takes its place. Now that we've got that working and we know it works, the important thing is the prefab. We need to change that is looping, because otherwise it's just going to continue to play over and over every 2 seconds. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. It's a nice short one. There's a request to make this video, so I thought I'd quickly just chuck this together and get this published. So hope you enjoyed it. Cheers.